This is the We Witches 3 podcast, where you will hear the opinion of 3 seasoned witches who are tired of glossy, tunnel vision, love and light accolades about serious metaphysical topics. Your host, Charlene, Maria Sewell, and Heather Woodworth have been practicing witches and professional psychics for over 20 years. They not only have the experience, but they have the research to back it up. So get comfortable on your brooms, grab a snack, and get ready for a wild ride.
Hey everybody, we are back again today, and today we are talking with Jake Richards, author of Backwoods Witchcraft, and he is going to be talking about Appalachian folk magic, something that's not really discussed in the community all that often, and so we are so excited to have him today because this is going to be a lot of fun. This is a juicy book.
I agree, it is a juicy book.
I haven't quite finished the book, and I'm really sad to say that, but I'm about 83% of the way through it. And there's a lot of stuff in here that is real old in my memory, and then a lot of stuff that's real brand new.
I practice hoodoo, so some of the stuff I already knew, but then other stuff I was like, wow, okay, this is going to take my practice to like a whole new level. It's amazing stuff. So Jake, what made you want to write a book like this? Because it's so different than everything else out there.
Well, honestly, I actually never planned to write a book. I was simply doing my studies and practice because, it's like family heritage. So I wanted to continue that on because all of my elders most of them have passed away. But I basically wrote the book because there was a lot of misinformation being spread out there. And also because this tradition is dying out for a number of reasons because, young people, they don't really care anymore. It's apparently not really of use when it actually can be, as well as the elders, they're just not sharing it, they're dying with the secrets, or they're simply letting it be forgotten. But I believe that it is an integral underlining part of the history of Appalachia and of the the survival and the independence of Appalachian people.
Absolutely. And one thing that I found really, really valuable in reading your book is how much of the historical research you've done.
Oh, yeah, definitely, because every single aspect of Appalachian folk magic ties, into the history of Appalachia, whether it's, simple folklore or the use of certain tools or ingredients, or even just, foods that were, readily at hand that over time became added on into certain recipes and remedies and things like that, simply because it was widely available. So the entire practice is essentially, it contains a number of things. It contains stories from the elders, the history of the practice itself, and it can also map you back to the roots, back to, the German, the Irish, the Scottish immigrants, as well as the Native American influences that came in contact with it during its development.
Now, you mentioned that the elders are dying out with this knowledge, and the young people don't seem as interested in it as they used to be. They aren't asking about it or picking it up, and it's not being passed down. Now, like New Age and spirituality and witchcraft in particular seem to be picking up in popularity right now in the wider culture. Do you find that's not true in Appalachian culture, or?
It is. I simply think it is kind of like a cultural remembering that there is something more, that something else can be done to force or persuade the hands of nature and God in a certain way and pattern, to go in your favor, whether it's with a legal case or simply to keep food on the table. But I think the reason why it's, because it's not on the surface of our culture, because it's so embedded in our culture that it often goes unnoticed. People will just knock on wood without thinking about it and, stuff like that nowadays. And even back then, it wasn't really called anything. It was just something that you did when, a job needed to be done. So, it never really had a name, aside from, the more open portions of the practice, which was primarily folk healing, like stopping blood with a Bible verse or buying warts from someone, different things like that. But the majority of it is being lost because of cultural changes, whether it's, economic changes, especially with like social media and everything like that. A lot of kids here aren't, growing up the way their elders did. So, they're not growing up, playing outside or in nature or anything like that. I mean, 2-year-olds have iPads nowadays. Basically, it's just a certain way of upbringing that conditions you for these mountains and hills, as well as, that the practices that were employed and upheld by the elders, because as I explained in the book, the terrain of Appalachia deeply affected the development of the practice as well. Weather charms and everything like that were worked. Bible verses were used to bring rain or stop rain, or deeply affected the livelihood of the people back then, because a big downpour of rain today doesn't really affect much. It just mostly ruins our day.
Right. So that makes sense, especially with the advent of the internet, that a culture that kind of thrived on the basis of its isolation gets lost when it's no longer isolated.
Now we're no longer really isolated, so the newer generations aren't, in isolation with the cultural practices and, music and food and everything like that. Everybody wants to know what's going on elsewhere, in California or across seas or whatever it may be. Nobody really cares about, well, not necessarily community, but there's not as much interest in, your next door neighbors as there used to be.
Yeah. One of the things that I liked about this book is that while I was reading it, I felt like I was actually there, and like, I don't know, I was like part of your family or part of your tribe or something. I don't know. There's a sense of like, I don't know how to explain it. Like, you're talking right now, and I can hear your cadence in the book. Like, you write exactly how you speak. And we were talking about that.
Yeah, we were.
We were saying, I bet you he sounds exactly like you think in your head, because it just feels like you're kind of encompassing a world. And I wanted to know about your family. Is this something that's practiced daily, or was this part of a Christian upbringing? Or tell us about that.
All right, so it's a lot in my family, because my mother's father, was a Baptist preacher, and he was able to, cure whooping cough by blowing in a kid's mouth. He could stop blood with a Bible verse. He could buy off warts. He could, take out a fever with an egg. And I was always told growing up that he could do this because he never laid eyes on his father, because his father died really soon after he was born. We was always told that he got hit by a train, but during my ancestry search, I found out that he had a heart attack. And then my grandmother, his wife, she's always had the sight just as well as he did. They always knew, whatever was going on, because I grew up in a household where, my dad was abusive to my mom or whatever like that. And 9 times out of 10, they would just show up out of nowhere, because they knew, that something was going wrong, that something wasn't right. And then my mother also has the sight. It gets annoying being in a family where everybody knows everything, even though you've never said a word, because they're always right, no matter what. You can say that they're not, you can pray that they're not, you can hope that they're not, but they're going to be. And she has the sight because she is the 7th daughter, because my grandmother had 7 children in total, but 4 of the children did not survive infancy. I can't remember why. I think it was, various illnesses, colds, or something like that. I don't really have the sight per se, like where I can, perceive, spirits, and I do get gut feelings and things like that. And I have dreamed true a couple of times, which is, basically like prophetic dreams, because I was, as Mama called it, born blue, meaning I looked like a Smurf when I was born, because I like inhaled amniotic fluid or something like that. So I took my first breath in the womb. And then my sister, she had the sight, but she somehow prayed it away or got rid of it or something like that. She doesn't, which makes no sense. She doesn't do any of this. And she had the sight because she was a left twin. She had a twin in the womb, but her twin died in the womb. So she is like the remaining twin, essentially. But yeah, it goes back generations. My Nana's, I think it was her grandfather, my great-grandfather, Papa Oscar. He was a water witch for Washington County, and a lot of people would come to him and, ask him to douse for water to build a well and things like that. And recently, after writing the book, we were actually going through old family photos to try and find a picture of Oscar. But in the while looking for it, we found this other picture that we had never, ever seen before. Never. And we've had these albums and pictures, God, since long before I was born. And it's a picture of my Nana Trivett's father, and he's like posed in front of some kind of weird, it's like a country backdrop, but you can tell it's just a backdrop and it's not an actual photo. But he's also holding something in his hand, or in his, I think it's his right hand. But only that portion of the picture is blurred, and it looks like some kind of like little plastic toy doll with feathers attached to it. I still, to this day, can't figure out what it's for. But that is the only portion of the picture that is blurred. And I can clearly see like a little bloody bandage on his left thumb, just, right next to it. And the strangest thing is, when we first found it, I was going to take a photo of it so I could, take it to Walmart and get it printed out before Mama said that I could just have it. But when I initially took the photo on my iPhone, it took upside down. And like the little turn signal thing that you do to flip the screen, that was not on. I have no idea why it took upside down. But yeah, we're still figuring stuff out. And it is on both sides of the family. I'd say I've been studying and actively doing this for about 11 years, give or take a year. So until then, I never really, thought anything of it, because I was initially, first introduced to magic through, of course, the modern age, Wicca, things like that. But then certain things, started reminding me of, childhood memories and things like that. And that is when I started, delving into this practice, full force.
What did your family think of, like, when you were first delving into it, like with the Wicca and stuff? Like, what was their perceptions on that?
My mother was fine with it because she did the same thing when she was about my age back then, like 12, whatever. But then she eventually left it like I did. My grandmother, on the other hand, it took her a while to, understand that the things that the family always did was, in the same ball field, essentially. Because by definition, it is witchcraft, it is magic, it is conjure. I mean, it didn't take her a long time to, come around the terms. Especially when, she knew that I started delving deeper into the family practice. That was the last that I heard anything negative from her.
You said something in your book, and I was just reading it. That's why I had it in the top of my head. You said something about photos. You turn photos upside down.
Mm-hmm.
What was that? Because you said the photo was turned upside down in your phone, but I know you mentioned something about that in your book.
Well, when the photo turned upside down on my phone, I didn't know what the hell to think. I was like, what is going on? Are you referring to, like, calling someone, like, back if they're traveling? I believe that's okay. That is basically to, how do you explain it? Basically make their mind uneasy, to make them uncomfortable and want to come back to, back home, because, there's no place like home. I'm not sure if, that in the book, as well as that weird phenomenon with the photo, has any connection, because I'm still trying to figure out the photo. But yeah, that's essentially what that is doing when you turn the photo upside down.
Do you think he was a witch doctor or something like that, or a conjurer?
See, that I don't know, because I've only been able to gather a few stories from my grandmother, because she's now in the last stages of dementia. So it's hard to get her, in the right mood or catch her in the right time when she is able to remember. So the only things really that I know about him is that she said that he was a good Christian man, but he didn't go to church very often, and she only heard him cuss once in her life, and that was just, saying the word shit. And then I recently learned through, what's it called? It's like that memorial, findagrave.com. Another family member, distant family member, apparently put on there that he was a brick manufacturer for some old local brick making company. But that's all that I've been able to gather so far.
You mentioned that there's some like formal, I guess, traditions when it comes to studying, like the mother teaches the son and the father teaches the daughters. Mm-hmm. How the traditions go. Is there like an age where you start learning those things, or is it just kind of like a lifelong as it comes up kind of deal?
Basically as it comes up, because a lot of the tradition, up until now has been very much an oral tradition. Sometimes, recipes were written down or whatever. But yeah, it is most definitely, as far as my family does it, it's still, father to daughter, mother to son, and things like that. And some things that my grandfather taught my mother, she has now taught me. That's just the way that I was taught that certain things need to be passed down. They're like in other regions, like in Kentucky or Virginia, it may be different, where, gender, regardless of gender, you can share it. But usually there are other limitations, like certain things you can only share to 3 people. Some things you can share to, just about anyone, like the blood verse. There's just different variations based on the region, the community, and even down to individual family lines.
So how does that kind of interface with what you've shared via your book?
Well, certain things I didn't share in the book based on those family traditions, whereas other things where, I was not directly taught from my mother, instead from like an informant or somebody that I've come across in my studies, then, that I did share in the book. Now, I am actually planning, I don't know if it's going to be soon, but somewhere down the road, of doing online classes and things like that, where, certain things that I have learned from my mother, I will essentially teach to the women of the class, and then the women will need to share it to the men of the class. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
absolutely. Okay. That sounds really exciting, actually.
Yeah, that way, because based on superstition, there's no, interference with the actual cure or charm or recipe being passed down.
Right. So that the whole like mother to son and father to daughter is more about the feminine and masculine energy exchange rather than like a lineage issue.
Again, there are other certain things that can only be passed on to a blood relative. So there's a bunch of different, I wouldn't say regulations, I guess rules to it. I guess that would be a good word.
It's as good as any other one.
Or
protocols.
You use the word customs if you want to.
I like customs.
Yeah, customs sounds a little bit less strict than rules.
Or traditions. It could be a tradition.
Yeah.
Precautions, maybe.
I wonder, though, you were talking about how your sister has the site, but you don't have the site. But then you're the one that does it for a living or has written a book about it and kind of put it out there. So how does that work?
Yeah, I don't know where the tables turned on that one. My mom was confused about it, too. She basically says on a daily basis, that ain't how I raised her. I don't know. I guess I was more open to it. The site, because she started getting it when she was really young. I think she started having we called them visions because we didn't know what else to call them. I think she was about 8 or 9. She kept seeing, I'm not talking about, visions of like, oh, money's coming or anything like that. Like these were things that an 8-year-old should not know. Oh. It was something about a woman running from a man in the woods and then flashing to see her dead in the creek.
Wow.
Yeah. It was strange. And she would stay up night after night just crying because she was afraid to go to sleep because she might dream true or anything like that. And that's why I make it a point to say, note in the book that those gifts cannot be controlled, because it is simply at the hand of God, simply at the hand of the spirits of when you are to see and what you are to see. So it is totally separate from psychic abilities because it can't really be trained. It can be used somewhat kind of like a faucet where you can get in that trance where you know you're going to receive some kind of information, but you don't know what. So that's why with all of my readings that I do for clients, I always tell them there's no guarantees. I don't know if I can see the answer for you. I don't know if it'll come, but I know what will come will be what is supposed to come. So yeah, I don't know how she did it. She just became, when she started having them, she, became uber Christian, like overly uber Christian. I don't know how she got rid of it. I don't know if she still has them, because she never, after a few, I think it was about a year of dealing with it, she just stopped talking about it altogether. She stopped talking about anything to do with superstitions, magic, roots, anything like that. And still to this day, she won't. Like, if you mention it, she'll change the subject.
Wow.
So she still has it. She still has it. She just knows how to hide it better now. She just avoids it.
Probably.
I guess, but I'm not exactly sure.
Oh, so you don't have the visions, but you do the work. You actually do it in practice, right?
Yeah. The sight is kind of like a separate gift aside from, the ability to actually work roots. Whenever I'm doing like the bone readings for clients where I speak to their spirits or anything like that, then I am able to connect with the dead, but I don't think it's because of, having the sight necessarily. That I still don't know, because usually it comes later in life or super early in life. And Heather came super early in life, so I guess we got about 20 more years on that time clock. Because my mother's came about when she was, let's say she had me when she was 19. So yeah, I was about 9 when she got it. So late 20s, early 30s, something like that is when, she started getting it.
So I'm kind of curious how the rest of your family has reacted to your sister's kind of rejection of the traditions. Do they just kind of let her be with that and kind of honor it?
It's because it's not necessarily for everyone, because the sight is often based on circumstance, being born a certain way or born into a certain situation. So it's not really something that you yourself get to choose. But we figure, if she has prayed it away and God took it away, then that we can just leave it at that.
So there's no personal insult or turning her back on things or anything like that.
Just the portion where she disregards all superstitions altogether. Like she has a baby now, my little nephew, and he's actually started teething. And we've told her multiple times all the different ways that, she can do to, get him to, calm down, sleep better, and get him through it easy. But she don't listen.
Oh, poor thing.
Yeah.
Poor little guy. Oh, wow. So that has to feel really weird and frustrating for the family.
A little bit.
So how do you learn how to throw the bones?
Essentially, it is a form of divination. As I speak in the book, it is a form of scattering divination. Mm-hmm. Back in the day, they would use anything other than bones, whether it was rocks or beans or sunflower seeds, corn kernels, different things like that. But traditionally, it is supposed to be either possum or raccoon bones that are used. And it's basically, you do have to have a connection with your ancestors, which again today is being lost as, grave traditions and things like that are being forgotten, especially around Memorial and Decoration Day. Nobody really regards their ancestors the way they used to here anymore. So it does require a connection to your ancestors, because they would be your protectors as well as your guides during the reading. And then the bones themselves, you basically set a particular meaning between you and your ancestors for a particular bone. So it's kind of like speaking in code with the dead, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. It does.
Absolutely.
So say one bone would be marked a certain way, one bone would have a certain colored string tied around it, and each bone is supposed to designate, a certain person or situation, whether it's a lover, a friend, a stranger, an enemy, whether it's supposed to represent the person's job or anything like that. And then essentially the bones are cast, and the relationships between the bones as they land, the shapes, the patterns that they take, what bones are touching, what bones are farthest away.
Interesting. I like too that it's all kind of like loosey-goosey as opposed to like more, I guess the way we've formalized it more in like parapsychological research.
Oh yeah.
It's nice. It feels a lot more organic that way. Yeah,
I would always catch my Nana just staring off at nothing or whatever, and occasionally I'd ask her if she was okay, and she'd be like, "Yeah, just talking to God," because that's what my family called it.
Oh, I love how casual that is.
And
like,
now that
just
she
a chat.
Yeah. But now that, she has the dementia, she does it a lot more. So we can't really tell if it's the dementia or the sight.
Right.
So we just, have to wait for her to say something. Just like the other day, she has a little recliner that she sits and sleeps in. She's always slept in a recliner because for some reason beds hurt her back. So she has like a little recliner in the corner of her living room so she can, see out the living room window and see everybody outside. And the other day, Mom said that she was, essentially gazing outside. And then she just up and said, "Brandy, what's that little boy across the street doing running around with a lampshade on his head?" And Mama looked out the window and she said, "Mama, what little boy with a lampshade on his head?" And she said, "Them apartments right there across the street in that yard there." Mama didn't see a thing, so we guess she was, seeing people like spirits. She said they was having a whole barbecue out there, and there wasn't nobody inside.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, that is incredible.
So to shift gears a little bit, I just love the chapter that you had on animal spirits, especially how you talked about the way the traditions used to be practiced and the way that you practice them now in accordance with current laws and beliefs in regards to like animal cruelty and endangered animals and the possession of animal parts and things like that. I really, really liked how you spoke about that and how you've kind of updated the practices to be more modern and more ethical and stuff like that. And I kind of wanted to hear about how you made that decision to modernize your practice or amend your practices to do that.
I've been an animal lover. I love animals. So some of the, practices from way back when, to me nowadays seem, barbaric. And as my spirits have shown me in the past, there's always another way, and they will show you essentially. Now, anytime I do use, animal parts, from, local kills or anything like that, I do make sure that, they were killed ethically or, for a good cause. Like recently, I just had a client offer me some bear parts from her cousin because a bear cat was getting into, I think he said it was his pigs or his chickens or something like that. And like the meat or nothing is going to go to waste or anything like that. And since it was on his property, it was, permitted, it was legal. So yeah, things like that I don't really have an issue with, as long as, everything's going to go to use, because I was raised never to waste anything. So I don't think, an animal should be killed for, solely magical purposes. Like I'll sometimes go fishing and, catch rainbow trout or catfish, and I'll bring them home and, cook them up and eat them. And then I'll use the other parts like the bones, or I'll, take the skin from the fish and tan it and preserve it for, different reasons. But no, anything like, because there was an old recipe. I don't know if I included it in the book. There was so much I included. It's basically an old, what I call uprooting practice. It was a practice that's universal in American folk magic, but in the Deep South, a lot of people know it as hotfoot work. Basically, work to get someone out of your life, to make them leave town even. And what they would do is they would go and they would catch a catfish or a trout or whatever kind of fish they could find, and they would essentially gut the fish alive, stick the personal concern, whether it was hair, a picture, a name paper, or whatever, into the fish, sew it back up, and throw it in the river.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Which, not
Talk
to
about
say,
really wanting to get rid of somebody.
you're right.
Wow.
But that's not to say, that the old folks didn't care about animals, because they did. There was just a certain degrees to like which animals were regarded at with, like compassion and things like that. As far as I've found, that line kind of stops after cats and dogs. So like fish, birds, insects, those were often, and frogs, those were often used in cures and things like that, where essentially the animal was supposed to perish for some reason. Another old one was to, like if a kid had asthma, a cure for asthma was to take the kid fishing, and the first fish that he caught, you would basically have the kid lay down and lay the fish on his chest, and as the fish died, because of lack of air, it was supposed to also, or not air, lack of water, oxygen, if you want to get exact, it would essentially take the asthma with it. Like,
right.
as the fish dies, so too does the illness or the disease.
And the one reason I thought that discussion that you had in the book was really fascinating is because, in the modern rediscovery and modernization of witchcraft, there's a lot of debate about whether or not you can change the old traditions or invent new ones, if the new ones are valid at all, because they aren't old. Yeah. And so I really loved that you had that discussion in the book, that you really had to sit with yourself and think about, was it okay to change these traditions you had? And I love that you said that, you sat with your spirits and decided there was another way.
Yeah, which, I mean, I'm not the only one to do it, and it's not just been done in modern times. Because even if you just, follow the timeline of certain, recipes or remedies that do require, animal sacrifice, then you can see that sometimes it does change. One famous one would be the, infamous black cat bone. Originally, you were supposed to catch a black cat, go to a graveyard at midnight, sometimes boil it alive over the oldest grave. Sometimes the grave isn't really specified. And you're supposed to boil it until essentially the meat is rendered from the bones. And then from that point, there's many variations on how to determine, which bone is the lucky bone. There's one that I found where the cat was essentially shaved and then fried. It didn't really, specify, whether you kill it first or you kill it through the frying. So that one can be, personalized. Essentially, if you find a dead cat on the road, I don't recommend eating it though, because this one says you should eat the fried cat. And then, basically, as soon as you bite into the piece that contains the bone, you apparently go blind, and someone touches your shoulder and says, "Meet me at the crossroads."
Wow.
But there are more variations where it doesn't necessarily specify to kill the cat. Sometimes it says, take the carcass of a black cat to a graveyard. So by carcass, it essentially means, one that's already dead. So yeah, different recipes and remedies have been changed over time. Again, based on necessity and personal choice and, personal morality. Just like, certain animals can't be killed during a certain season. So I've adapted it in my practice based on other recipes and remedies and, different patterns throughout those to use, I guess, personal links to that kind of animal, whether it's wood from a place that a particular bird landed on. My family also uses the bedding from where like a deer has laid down in a field, or even dirt from like a snake's den or a groundhog hole or a mouse hole or anything like that, without any actual harm to the animal, because a lot of animals in Appalachia are protected by law now, whether they're endangered or, whatever the case may be.
It's very innovative.
Well, I basically grew up around animals my whole life, so I mean that's my personal choice. Whatever, other possible families do in Appalachia is basically their business. Because I always grew up around all kinds of animals, whether it was cows, pigs, chickens, ducks, goose, cats, dogs, sometimes the occasional copperhead.
I love it. That's fantastic.
So on Facebook and those kinds of groups, you always see the egg in the water, the reading the eggs. Do you? Mm-hmm. I know you mentioned it in your book. I know you did one for rolling the egg over your body and then getting rid of the sickness and then putting it in the water. Do you find that that's very popular right now? Do people ask you for that a lot?
They don't ask me for it a lot. A lot of times they ask information so they can do it themselves. It's not a very popular practice in Appalachia, but it was in my family because my grandfather did it. And as far as I can tell, it actually traces back to Mexico because I believe it was back in the, I want to say 1950s or maybe 1940s. There was a large influx of Hispanic communities and things like that in, my actual area in eastern Tennessee. So, some remedies were influenced by that. I'm not exactly sure if that is where my grandfather learned it or, where exactly that came about in my family. But that just goes to show that even today it is still developing, with society, with different influxes of different people coming in. And, the natives kind of adapting to it and adding it in.
Oh, see, that's really interesting, too, because you mentioned that I think it was your mother's favorite representation of Mary was the Virgin de Guadalupe.
Oh, yeah. The Catholic population in eastern Tennessee isn't really that big. Like in the entire general area, like Western Virginia, Western North Carolina, East Tennessee, as well as going down towards Knoxville, there's maybe a total of, last time I checked on Google Maps, it was like 9 Catholic churches.
Oh, wow.
But, the further you zoom out, the higher the number gets. But in my particular area, Catholicism isn't, or wasn't necessarily a big influence, but it did have somewhat of an influence. And today, the only candles that we can find here in regards to saints or anything like that is, Our Lady of Guadalupe as well as St. Jude, both of which are essentially patrons for the poor.
Yeah, I see those everywhere too around here. I just kind of have to make stuff up sometimes because I'm like, okay, there I got Archangel Michael, I got Lady Guadalupe, or I got St. Jude. So I guess I'm peeling the thing off and using the color of the candle, or I'm turning it around or something.
Right.
Gotta do what you gotta do sometimes.
Oh no, here it's Virgin Mary and St. Lazarus.
I'd love to find a candle with St. Lazarus on it.
Oh yeah, come to Miami. Come to Florida. It's Lazarus is everywhere, especially during I think it's like December, which is his month or something.
Yeah, and December 17th.
There's like everything's either purple or yellow because those are his favorite colors. And like the stores are stocked with like his candles.
Oh, I'm so bad, you guys. I don't even pay attention to which saints and whatnot are on the candles here. I just buy the plain ones.
Same. I never just buy the plain ones.
I'm so bad. By the way, the saints section was really, really fascinating in the book. I had never read about the saints being treated that way.
Especially in like a Baptist church or whatever. Because in the Baptist church, there's always that taboo of adultery. I grew up on, hearing that all Catholics are, doomed to hell and all this other stuff. But as for me and my mother, we always kind of had an affinity for the Blessed Mother. So we've basically turned ourselves Catholic Baptist.
Is that a thing? It must be.
It is now.
It is now, it seems.
Sure, why not, right? That is just really cool. But I like the way that you specifically work with them, because that is very different from how I've seen other systems work with them, like Santeria and systems like that.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the hoodoo traditions and that way. Like, this seems very unique to Appalachia.
Yeah, because of the whole Baptist taboo thing, they're not really regarded as, any more powerful than, we are or our ancestors or anything like that. So it's kind of weird in Appalachian folk magic to try and distinct between, Catholic saints that are sometimes prayed to, or even prophets in the Bible. It's kind of hard to separate them from, just the general dead. Aside from, the special affinity that, they're biblical characters or, they're martyrs or anything like that. I can't remember what it was that I was told once. Can't remember who told me. I was really young and it was at church once. They were basically like defending Catholics, saying that saints aren't nothing but the first row of the choir in heaven or something like that because they're martyrs, essentially. So I guess that's a good description of it.
Yeah, and what I found really appealing about it was that they were so much more approachable, and they just seemed so much more human and personal.
Oh, yeah, definitely. My grandfather, whenever he preached, he always made a point to, show that, there is human error in the Bible, the prophets and the apostles, and all of them, they were human. They did have lives in which they erred before, and, that's how, they can be related to. Because, every sermon he did, it was basically like a teaching lesson, and you can't learn anything if you can't relate to it.
I love that viewpoint, and you really did make them very approachable here. And speaking of the Bible, you talk about how the Bible is kind of like the manual for a lot of the magic that's practiced.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And still to this day, my sister won't believe it.
The Bible, or that it's the manual?
The manual. That it can be used to, create certain works or anything like that.
I just find it so fascinating that there's this bridge where you're doing, root work and conjure and speaking to the dead with throwing bones and you're gazing, but then also there's this very Christian base to it. And, you said you're a Baptist Catholic, the conglomeration of the two, because so in my family, we were raised Baptist as well, but if I even mention the word magic or spell or tarot, it's like I'm going to hell. So I just find it so fascinating that you have this family that's so just okay with the superstitions and the word and all that stuff, and it's so blended.
Oh, yeah. I think it's mostly because they just ignored the labels. Because as far as I've ever known, it wasn't called witchcraft, it wasn't called conjure, which it necessarily is conjure. It was simply called trying, or, if you thought somebody was doing something bad to you, then, you were simply being witched or anything like that. Based on some websites will tell you that the word witch never became taboo, but it definitely did in Appalachia.
Well, I can kind of understand that because I grew up and my mother was a practitioner, but she would be appalled at the word witch.
Oh, yeah.
That was not a word that we used.
Yeah, like I explained in the book, the word witch was in Appalachia was reserved for somebody who, did dealings with the devil and consorted with demons and all that stuff. And usually they were simply, as history has told us, they were simply a, misunderstood outcast. Whereas the folk healer or the root doctor or anything like that in Appalachia, they're regarded as, good or godly simply because the community believes that their powers came from God. Even though the conjurer as well as the witch could be seen doing the same work, whether it was a love work, cursing, healing, their reputation was solely based on the attitude and beliefs about them from the community.
Right, so whether or not people like them.
Yeah.
I find that so accurate to the way society really is.
Oh, yeah.
Pretty much. Yeah.
Because you can do whatever you want, just don't call it a bad word. You know, don't call it witch or witchcraft or
don't label
anything
it,
like
basically.
that. Yeah. As long as you don't label it, you know, ain't no reason to think that there's sin behind it.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly, and that's exactly the way like I grew up too, where my mother would do, you know, all these things that were clearly spell work, but witchcraft really just meant black magic.
Yeah. And see, for the longest time, I did believe that, you know, any kind of witchcraft was devil worship. But then, you know, I was just fine with, you know, my grandfather taking a fever out with an egg or stopping blood with a Bible verse or anything like that. Simply because in my mind, the two weren't synonymous. But, you know, upon further studying, they basically are. Well, in the same ball field, essentially. Because as far as I've learned and as far as I believe, the human race has never been divorced from magic. Never. Even with the oncoming of the Christian age and the Christian era, you know, there was still magic. Certain things were simply changed. Labels were redone or ignored. So yeah, I do believe that magic and the belief that you can use physical materials to persuade or force the hand of nature to go in your favor, I believe it is an inherent human behavior.
No, I completely agree. I think that a lot of the rites and rituals we see are still witchcraft. People just call them healing or blessing or whatever makes them comfortable. Light work.
Light work, that's...
I know that's your favorite, Heather.
Yeah.
Well, it's witchcraft. I don't, you know what I mean? Like, if you're doing any kind of divination, you're probably going into the vein of witchcraft. It's just how it is. I don't know.
Exactly. And just like there's plenty of, you know, examples of spells or formulas, whatever you want to call them, because, you know, sometimes, especially by the prophets and the apostles, certain things were acceptable. So essentially, you know, the Israelites and things like that, they had their own magic, whereas when it comes to the Bible, the things that were forbidden was the magic and witchcraft of other people, because, you know, throughout the entire text of the Bible, you can see culturally where the writers are trying to make their religion and their culture superior to that of others, because, you know, starting out they were a minority in the land of Canaan, so they had to, you know, make big statements and try and make a big influence, which ultimately worked. And we can clearly see that in, you know, the story of Exodus with Moses and Pharaoh. You know, Pharaoh was able to do the exact same things that Moses did, but the story tells us that Moses's was superior, that Moses beat him because Moses's magic or miracles or power was superior to that of the Pharaoh's.
Wow, you're getting real right now.
Right. Well, Moses's powers came from God, and the Pharaoh didn't. It came from Ra.
And again, it has to do with the beliefs of the community.
Right.
And in this point, the beliefs of the writers of the sacred book.
Exactly. So what are your plans for the future?
What do you mean per se?
Are you going to write another book? What do you got going on?
She means when are you writing another book? And what are you working on now?
The second book is actually in the works. I just got to figure out how I'm going to work on it with this traveling job. So after this, I actually got to run to Walmart and get a flash drive that will actually work with my computer. That way I can take the file with me and then at some point get a laptop to work on. But yeah, I'm pretty sure that the next book is going to be, if not a lot, or, you know, at least a little bit bigger than the first book, because as far as I have it planned, it's going to be in 4 parts.
Oh,
wow.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, and this time it's going to deal with both folk medicine and folk magic.
I saw on your Facebook that you've never flown before.
Yeah, I'm terrified.
Oh,
Listen, I'm
I was
5'4". God didn't plan for me to be off the ground more than 10 feet.
Hence the lack of wings.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I hear that. Heather, you should send him that article you found.
Which one?
The one about luxury flights.
Oh yes, but you have to have $18,000.
Well, we're working on
I'm a
getting
bit
him
short
there.
on that right now. About $18,000, or possibly
Like
a bit negative.
Oh no.
People always think, "Oh, you wrote a book, you must be rich," and you're like, "Where did you get that from?"
I wish.
I love it when people are like that. I'm like, no.
Yeah, everybody's like, "You're famous now," and I was like, "Am I?" Because my bank account doesn't look like I am.
Well, like I said, we're working on that because this really was just a fantastic book. Like I said, I'm only like 83% through, but I absolutely love it.
What I love about it is I did not read it in chronological order. I was skipping through it, and I was like, "Oh, I want to read this chapter next." And you could just dive into a chapter and just read it and be like, "Wow, I learned so much just now. I gotta take notes." Like, you gotta get your highlighter out. You know what I mean? Like, I had so many ideas for spell work or for root work, and I was like, "Oh, this is gonna," like I said in the beginning, "this is gonna totally change the way that I do magic."
Yeah,
because
essentially writing and planning this book was one of the utmost hells that I have ever gone through, because I'm an Aquarius, so I have that logical mind that's like, okay, so if I'm reading this book, how should it be organized? And then I got my spirits in my ear telling me, no, you got to do this. And then if I didn't listen to them, they'd pop up in my dreams and tell me, so I can't even sleep at night. So it was really
a bit of a struggle, to say the least.
Yeah, it was a struggle to, get it, perfect and everything like that. And I honestly can't believe the wonderful job that, Weiser did. And I still don't think it's real. I'm about to, I'm still waiting for them to be like, just kidding.
Oh no. No, and your writing voice, your author voice is really, like Heather was saying earlier, like I really feel like I'm walking with you in Appalachia. Like you're just showing me around your home.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's how I wanted it to be, because you can't fully understand the practice of a people without understanding the people, where they come from, what they've gone through, what kind of place they live in, or anything like that, because all of that ties into folk magic, no matter what part of the country you look at, or what country you look at, because it seems to all basically develop the same. Born from survival, developed through poverty or necessity, and different things of that nature. So it's kind of like a universal recipe for, again, that human trait of magic, of wanting to change things, essentially.
Right, and needing to change them. And like Heather said, I've been highlighting the heck out of my copy. Thank goodness it's a Kindle. Like I got the ebook copy, so I'm able to highlight them and then search my highlights.
Yeah.
Which is like cheating a lot, and I love it.
yeah, it is that kind of book where you want to keep it around with you when you're doing stuff to make sure that you're
and especially when it's a book with so much information, where you work a 9-to-5 job and don't really have time to read it front to back. So that's why I love whenever I get Kindle books and it has that little search button, so I can just search for keywords and find what I'm looking for.
And you drop these parenthetical tidbits where it's like, okay, this isn't even that chapter, but I need this part.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you're writing a second book. I'm sure that this book is going to put you on the map. I know a lot of people are talking about it. I know when I was going through the Weiser catalog, this is one of the first books that I actually picked, because I was like, this has something special to it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I know there has been a lot of talk in a lot of communities about Appalachian folk magic and wanting to find real sources, and they have been so hard to find.
Oh, yeah, and that is primarily why I wanted to be so truthful and authentic with this book, and try and not, include too many modern practices, because to me, my family's done it for years, and we've actually survived because of it. Like I talk about in the book, my mother always has a little money jar next to the front door to help keep money in the house, and I swear, there were some days where we thought we would go hungry, but somehow we would eat. We would have the things that we needed. So that's why I constantly, say that this is poor man's work, because you're not going to get rich fast. If you were going to get rich fast, Appalachia wouldn't even be on the map. We'd be out somewhere. We'd be gone. We would no longer be here.
I don't know. It's so beautiful there.
It's beautiful, but once you get to the societal portions, it's not too much.
Right, yeah. Everyone would have escaped.
Oh, yeah. And people have tried many times, but just like one friend that I used to travel with, he's from here. He made a post on Facebook saying, he's been gone so long and he wants to come back home, but now that he's back home, he's been here for like a day. He wants to leave again.
Oh, no.
Like, we even have folk stories of the devil himself coming to stay in Appalachia and deciding to leave.
Oh, my God. Yeah, I really can't imagine how you would gentrify Appalachia.
Yeah.
Well, the devil lives here.
Well, the devil wouldn't stay.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah, the story goes that he went back to hell because it was better than this place. And that's actually a Tennessee story, so that's talking about Tennessee.
Tennessee. It sounds like there's a little pride in there, too, though.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, man. It's really just thank you so much for this book and for your time today.
You're welcome. Thank you for listening to the We Witches 3 podcast. For show notes and links, please go to www.wewitches3.com.